All right, let's dive right in. We're going to explore a story that's, get this, over 1,300 years old. But here's the thing, it's still being used today as a powerful inspiration for revolutions and protests happening all across the globe. You know, this quote right here, from Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, it just perfectly captures the whole idea. It's this notion that a historical event isn't really locked in the past. It's more like a timeless, universal struggle against injustice that can happen anywhere, at any time. So that brings us to the big question for this explainer. What is this ancient story? How on earth did the death of one man and his tiny group of followers become this huge symbol for movements fighting for justice, thousands of miles away and centuries later? To figure that out, let's start with the echo. We're going to look at how a single battle from the 7th century has become this incredible rallying cry in our modern world. Now, what's just fascinating here is the sheer range of these movements. The source material shows the story of Karbala being a major influence in the Iranian Revolution, in protests in Nigeria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Bahrain. And it even draws a line of inspiration to Black Lives Matter protests, framing Karbala as this universal symbol against any kind of oppression. But to really get why this story hits so hard, we've got to go back. We need to hear the original cry of defiance that kicked this whole thing off. And that takes us to our second section, the unyielding refusal. This is it. This is the starting point of the whole conflict. One man taking a principled stand against what he saw as absolute tyranny. So at the heart of the story, you've got two completely opposite figures. On one side, there's Imam Hussain, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. He's portrayed as a man of principle, someone committed to upholding a treaty. And then you have Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Sources describe him as this unjust, corrupt ruler who basically tore up that same treaty to seize power and demanded everyone pledge their allegiance to him. And Yazid's methods? They were brutal. The source says he literally ordered his governors to get that allegiance by any means necessary, using the tip of the sword. This wasn't about winning people over, it was all about power and fear. And this is the moment it all changes. Faced with this demand to legitimize what he sees as a corrupt regime, Imam Hussain makes his stand. And with this simple statement, he sets himself on a collision course with the entire empire. That refusal kicks off our next chapter, a journey that started with what looked like a promise of hope, but ended up as a deadly trap. So check this out. The people of a city called Kufa, it's in modern-day Iraq, they start sending thousands of letters to Hussein, begging him to come lead a rebellion. The source says over 18,000 people pledged their loyalty. But Yazid moves fast. He sends in this ruthless new governor, Ibn Ziyad, who just crushes the uprising, executes Hussein's cousin, and terrifies the entire city into silence. Just like that, the promised support, it's gone. And here's the truly tragic part. Hussein has no idea. He's totally unaware that his support base has just been dismantled. He's already on his way, and he's not traveling with an army. He's with his family and a small group of about 72 loyal companions. They're literally walking right into a trap. All of this builds to the climax of the story, the stand at Karbala. This is where that tiny group of scene makes its final, defiant stand against a massive empire. And wow, this just shows you how impossible this situation really was. I mean, on one side, you've got Hussein's 72 companions, and remember, that includes women and children. On the other side, Yazid's army, which grew to over 30,000 soldiers. The odds, well, to say they weren't in their favor is probably the understatement of the century. So the whole thing unfolds over a few days. They get trapped in the desert of Karbala. Then their access to the Euphrates River is cut off. Thirst becomes a weapon. On the final night, Hussein tells his followers, "Look, the army only wants me. You're free to leave in the darkness." The source says not a single person left him. The next morning, on the day of Ashura, the battle begins. It's really hard to overstate how cruel this tactic was. We're talking 3 days in the searing desert heat. Dozens of people, including little kids, denied even a single drop of water. This physical suffering is just a huge part of the story. And the source tells one of the most heartbreaking moments of the siege. Imam Hussain holds up his 6-month-old infant son, Ali Asghar, who is dying of thirst, and he pleads with the army just to give the baby some water. Their response? An arrow is fired, killing the child right there in his father's arms. One by one, Hussein's companions are killed in battle, and finally, alone and wounded, Imam Hussain himself is killed. The battle is over. From a purely military point of view, it was a total, brutal victory for Yazid's army. But the story was far from over.
Yeah, that military defeat was not the end. In fact, what's so crucial is how it was transformed. And this brings us to our final section, a legacy forged in blood, how martyrdom didn't end a movement, but actually became the catalyst for one. You see, what came out of this whole tragedy is something we could call the Karbala Paradigm. It's this powerful idea that sacrificing your life for a just cause isn't failure. It's the opposite. That sacrifice gives the movement an immortal, inspirational power that can fuel people for generations. The military loss becomes a huge moral victory.
And according to the source, the impact was immediate. The very same people in Kufa who had abandoned Hussein rose up in rebellion to avenge him. Revolts started popping up in other major cities, and eventually, the memory of Karbala was used as a rallying cry by the Abbasids, who would go on to overthrow Yazid's entire dynasty. The revolution had begun, creating this blueprint, turning tragedy into fuel that we see echoed centuries and centuries later.
And that brings us right back to where we started, to those echoes in Iran, Iraq, even in Black Lives Matter protests. The story of Karbala is an incredible example of how a story of sacrifice against impossible odds can just transcend time. And it leaves us with this final, big question to think about. When does a historical tragedy stop being just a memory and become a living, breathing, timeless symbol for justice?